Welcome, wherever you are right now, settled in, lying down, the day finally beginning to loosen its hold. This is a good place to be. Tonight we're going to move through something very old, the story of life on Earth. Not as a lecture, not as facts to file away and retrieve later. Just a story, a long one that started almost 4 billion years ago and is still, in every sense, going. So let's begin. Part 1. Before life began. Picture a planet with nothing living on it at all. No trees, no insects, no sound of wind moving through grass, because there is no grass. No birdsong, just rock and water and gas. The surface still cooling from its formation. Volcanoes active across the entire landscape. An atmosphere dense with methane, ammonia, carbon dioxide. Nothing you'd want to breathe. This is Earth, approximately 4.5 billion years ago. Not peaceful in any way we'd recognize. Not quiet in any comfortable sense. Raw, unfinished. A planet still working out the basic terms of its own existence. No oxygen to speak of. And yet, something was already assembling itself. In the oceans, or perhaps in warm, shallow pools near hydrothermal vents, or in coastal margins thick with dissolved minerals. The chemistry that would eventually lead to life was already underway. Simple molecules, amino acids, chains of carbon and hydrogen. Nothing alive yet, but the ingredients were accumulating. Before a single living cell appeared, Earth spent hundreds of millions of years just preparing, cooling, settling, arranging its chemistry into something workable. It took a very great deal of time, 500 million years, give or take. Scientists call this earliest period the Hadean Eon, named with a certain dry economy, after Hades, the ancient Greek underworld. Not because it resembled the dramatic, flame-lit underworld of myth, but because it was so completely unlike the world we know that the name seemed apt. The Hadean lasted from about 4.5 billion years ago until around 4 billion years ago. No life anywhere on the planet. Not a bacterium, just chemistry and physics and time, running their course in an ocean that covered most of the surface. During this period, the Earth was also being bombarded, a phase called the Late Heavy Bombardment, roughly 4.1 to 3.8 billion years ago, when the inner solar system was still dense with asteroids and comets left over from planetary formation. Some of these impacts were enormous. The Moon's cratered surface is a partial record of this period. Earth has been geologically reworked so many times since that the craters are mostly gone, but they were there. Some researchers think these impacting bodies may have delivered organic molecules, amino acids, water, to the young Earth. Others are less convinced. The debate hasn't fully resolved, but the question itself is not unreasonable. That some of the ingredients of life may have arrived from somewhere else entirely. And then, somewhere in those ancient waters, something changed. The very first thing we might call a living process was the formation of a self-replicating molecule. Just that, a molecule that could copy itself. Not a creature, not a cell, a tiny chemical structure. Atoms bonded together that had acquired the ability to reproduce. Scientists believe this molecule may have resembled what we now call RNA, a chemical cousin of DNA. RNA is simpler, and it has a genuinely unusual property. It can both carry information and act as a catalyst. Two jobs from one molecule. The hypothesis, the RNA world hypothesis, goes like this. Before DNA, before proteins, RNA did everything. It stored genetic information, and it drove the chemical reactions required for its own replication. Over vast stretches of time, DNA gradually took over the information storage role, being more stable, less prone to copying errors. And proteins took over most of the catalytic work. RNA settled into its current role as the intermediary, the messenger. This transition from an RNA world to a DNA protein world is one of the most discussed puzzles in origin of life research. It happened so long ago and left so little direct evidence that reconstructing it is genuinely hard. RNA's dual capacity is part of why the hypothesis holds up, though the fact that a single molecule type can do both jobs suggests something like an RNA world probably preceded what we see today. In the warm shallows of early Earth, RNA molecules may have begun copying themselves, making more of themselves, passing their structure forward generation after generation in a process that had no intention behind it, just chemistry doing what chemistry does when the conditions allow. Over millions upon millions of years, these self-replicating molecules became enclosed within a membrane, a thin, fatty layer, like a bubble, essentially, wrapping itself around the chemistry inside, holding it together, separating it from the surrounding ocean. Fatty molecules, lipids, have a property that makes this almost inevitable given the right conditions. One end of a lipid molecule is attracted to water, the other repels it. When enough of them are present in water, they spontaneously arrange themselves into hollow spheres, water-repelling ends tucked inward, water-attracting ends facing out. These form naturally, without any particular effort required. They're called vesicles, and you can make them in a laboratory with nothing more than the right lipids and water. What happened? At some point in the early ocean, or close to it, or something like it, is that self-replicating molecules ended up inside these spontaneously formed spheres, protected, concentrated, cut off in a useful way from the surrounding water. A cell, or close enough to one. The first things we might genuinely call alive appeared roughly 3.8 to 4 billion years ago. We know this from microfossils, microscopic traces preserved in very ancient rock. Tiny, single-celled organisms with no nucleus, no complex internal structure. A membrane, chemistry inside, genetic material floating freely. These earliest living things are called prokaryotes. From the Greek, before the kernel, before a nucleus. They were simple, but they consumed, grew, divided, reproduced. Life had arrived. Before any shape or color or movement we'd recognize, there was just this: division, repetition, chemistry, slowly and without intention, becoming biology. Part 2, the age of microbes. For an almost unimaginably long time, life on Earth was entirely single-celled. This lasted roughly 2 billion years. A way of feeling the scale. Imagine the entire history of Earth compressed into one calendar year. January 1st, the planet forms. Around the 20th of February, the first living cells appear. Complex life, animals, plants, anything visible, doesn't show up until mid-November. Our species, Homo sapiens, appears in the last few minutes of December the 31st. The age of microbes fills roughly the first half of that year. February through July. Billions of years in which the most complex thing on Earth was a single cell. No eyes, no limbs, nothing moving in any way we'd recognize as deliberate. Just microbes, dividing and consuming and dying in oceans that covered most of the planet's surface. For a long time, This chapter didn't get much attention in popular accounts of life's history. The focus tended toward the dramatic, the dinosaurs, the large Cambrian animals, single-celled life from the Archean and Proterozoic eons got a paragraph or two, and then the story moved on. The more carefully it's been studied, the more interesting it turns out to be. These early microbes were not passive. They were actively changing the world around them. The most consequential, and this is probably not a distinction they would have noticed, was something called a cyanobacterium, a microbe that evolved the ability to use sunlight as energy, to take in carbon dioxide and water, rearrange those molecules using light, and release oxygen as a byproduct, photosynthesis. The process we now associate with green leaves in gardens and forests began here, in single-celled organisms floating in the sunlit shallows of a very early ocean. Here is the irony. Oxygen, at this point in Earth's history, was toxic to most life. The organisms that came before cyanobacteria were anaerobic. They lived without oxygen, and oxygen killed them. So the first great atmospheric transformation in Earth's history was, from the perspective of the creatures living through it, a slow catastrophe, caused not by industry, not by civilization, but by tiny sunlit bacteria going about their business, inadvertently poisoning the world they lived in. This is called the Great Oxidation Event, around 2.4 billion years ago. Over millions of years, cyanobacteria released enough oxygen to fundamentally alter the chemistry of the entire atmosphere. Most anaerobic organisms were pushed into oxygen-free refuges, deep sediment, underwater mud, corners of the planet where they could still function. Some adapted, some didn't. What emerged gradually was an atmosphere rich in oxygen, with a growing ozone layer, filtering ultraviolet radiation from the sun, the atmosphere that made everything else possible, including, eventually, us. The cyanobacteria are still here, still in the oceans, still photosynthesizing, doing exactly what they've done for over 2.5 billion years, which is either quietly admirable or simply what happens when something works and nothing comes along to displace it. Around 2 billion years ago, something happened that had no precedent in the history of life. One cell swallowed another cell, and the swallowed cell survived, didn't die, continued to live inside its host. Over time, the two became one. The inner cell became a permanent resident, carrying out specific tasks for the combined organism. The arrangement persisted. It was passed on. Scientists call this endosymbiosis. The theory was developed most fully by the biologist Lynn Margulis in the 1960s, when it was considered a fairly unorthodox idea. The scientific establishment resisted it, as it tends to do with ideas that require significant rethinking. It is now among the better supported frameworks in evolutionary biology. The evidence is hard to argue with. Mitochondria, the energy-generating structures in our cells, have their own DNA, separate from the DNA in the cell's nucleus. They replicate independently on their own schedule. Their ribosomes, the molecular machinery that builds proteins, more closely resemble bacterial ribosomes than those of eukaryotic cells. Every line of evidence converges on the same conclusion. Mitochondria were once free-living bacteria. The same happened with chloroplasts, the light-harvesting structures in plant cells. Their own DNA, their own bacterial ancestry. Plants that photosynthesize today do so using what were once entirely separate organisms, absorbed long ago into an arrangement that never ended. And so, a eukaryotic cell, one with internal structures, specialized compartments, organized complexity that hadn't existed before. Our cells are eukaryotic. Every cell in your body carries mitochondria, and those mitochondria were, in a very long ago sense, independent bacteria. They became part of us, and every organism like us. The mitochondria in your cells right now retain their own separate DNA. That's not metaphor. That's just what is true. With more complex internal machinery, cells could become larger. They could carry more genetic information, begin to specialize, begin, eventually, to cooperate. Groups of eukaryotic cells stuck together, first as simple colonies, then as more organized structures, different cells taking on different roles. Some for movement, some for sensing, some for reproduction. Multicellular life was emerging. Part 3. The Cambrian world, 540 million years ago. The continents looked nothing like they do today. One large landmass, shallow warm seas. An atmosphere different enough from ours that you'd notice it. And in those oceans, something was about to happen that had no precedent. Before this point, most ocean life was soft-bodied and simple. Mats of microbial film across the seafloor. Simple multicellular organisms drifting in the water column. Among them, a creature called Dickinsonia, flat and oval and ribbed, that moved slowly across the seabed, absorbing nutrients through its base. There's nothing quite like it alive today. Biologists still debate which branch of the tree of life it belongs to, or whether it belongs to any branch we'd currently recognize. Then, over a period of roughly 20 to 25 million years, brief in geological terms, though longer than the entire history of our genus, an extraordinary variety of new body plans appeared. Creatures with shells, with eyes, legs, claws, mouths designed for particular kinds of prey. The fossil record preserves this with unusual clarity in a formation called the Burgess Shale, high in the Canadian Rockies. Found and excavated in the early 20th century, these fossils hold the soft bodies of creatures from over 500 million years ago, preserved in fine-grained mudstone, in enough detail that you can see the texture of their skin in some specimens. People have stood in front of these fossils and found them genuinely difficult to believe. Among them, Anomalocaris, something like a large shrimp with compound eyes and grasping appendages near its mouth, perhaps half a meter long, one of the apex predators of the Cambrian Ocean, which gives you a sense of the scale of everything else. There's Hallucigenia, a small creature with paired legs and spines along its back, so genuinely confusing in its anatomy that when it was first reconstructed, the scientists built it upside down and back to front. They were working from what they had. Nobody's first interpretation of a 500 million year old animal is necessarily right. And Opabinia, with 5 eyes arranged along its head and a flexible, clawed proboscis. 5 eyes. It's a real animal. These are not imagined creatures. Their bodies are in rock. The forms life can take are stranger than most people tend to assume. Why this explosion of diversity happened has been debated for over a century. The honest position is that we don't have a settled answer. Rising oxygen levels in the oceans may have finally reached a threshold that allowed larger, more metabolically active bodies to function. The development of eyes. Once some animals could see, a kind of arms race may have followed, driving the rapid evolution of shells, spines, camouflage. There's also an ecological argument. As complex animals began filling different niches, the ecosystem itself became a driver of further diversity. More variety created more opportunity. More opportunity created more variety. Most likely, it was a combination of these things, interacting in ways that are difficult to separate at this distance. Part 4. Life moves onto land. For hundreds of millions of years after the Cambrian, life remained almost entirely in the sea. The land was, from a biological perspective, entirely inhospitable. Bare rock, no soil, ultraviolet radiation with little ozone to filter it, no food source, no shelter, no reason for anything to be there at all. The first colonizers were not animals. They were algae, cyanobacteria, early fungi and lichens, creeping into the damp margins at the edges of rock and water, accumulating organic matter, building, over millions of years, the absolute thinnest possible layer of what might eventually become soil. This began around 450 million years ago, in the Ordovician period. It's not a glamorous chapter, just films of algae and lichen spreading very slowly across bare rock. But it was the necessary precondition for everything that came after. The earliest land plants had no true roots, no leaves, small stems absorbing water and sunlight, living close to the ground where moisture could still reach them. Over millions of years, roots developed, then vascular systems to move water upward through taller stems, then leaves, large, flat surfaces for catching light. With the plants came animals. The first were almost certainly arthropods, ancestors of insects, spiders, centipedes, small, jointed creatures whose exoskeletons, already useful in the ocean, turned out to work equally well on land, helping to prevent them from drying out. Fossils from the Reenie Chert in Scotland, around 420 million years old, preserve some of these earliest land ecosystems. Tiny plants, early mites, and springtails moving among them, the beginnings of a food web on solid ground. Around 375 million years ago, in the shallow waters of the Devonian period, a group of fish began doing something unexpected. These were fish with unusual fins, not the fan-shaped fins most fish have, but fleshy, muscular structures, almost like primitive limbs. They could breathe air, and they had begun exploring the margins of the water, propping themselves up on those fins, moving through shallows and across exposed mud. These creatures, tetrapodomorphs, are the ancestors of every four-limbed vertebrate that has ever lived. Everything with four limbs, or structures derived from four limbs. Frogs, lizards, birds, horses, bats, whales, us. All of it traces back to these fish at the edge of the water. The most famous of them, discovered in the Canadian Arctic in 2004, is Tiktaalik, about 375 million years old. Part fish, part something else. A flat head and a neck, which fish don't have, and fins that could bear weight and push against a surface. Its discoverers had predicted, based on the geological record, that a transitional creature of roughly this kind should exist in rocks of that age. They organized an expedition to the right part of the Arctic. They found it in the first summer they looked, which felt, by the accounts of those involved, somewhat extraordinary. The descendants of animals like Tiktaalik moved gradually onto dry land. At first, they remained tied to water for reproduction, amphibians in the broad sense. Then came the amniotic egg, an egg with a protective membrane, self-contained, needing no water around it. That development freed vertebrate life from its reproductive dependence on water. The reptiles arose from that freedom, and from the reptiles, eventually, everything else. Part 5. The Age of Reptiles. The Permian period, roughly 300 to 250 million years ago, was a time of considerable diversity on land, reptiles of many kinds, and among them, a group called the synapsids, animals with a particular skull structure that placed them, in anatomical terms, as the ancestors of mammals, of us. The most famous synapsid is Dimetrodon, the sail-backed animal frequently mislabeled as a dinosaur in older natural history books and children's illustrations. It was not a dinosaur. It was, in fact, more closely related to you than to any dinosaur that ever lived, which, depending on how you feel about sail-backed carnivores, is either reassuring or slightly odd. Then, around 252 million years ago, the end Permian extinction. Massive volcanic eruptions in what is now Siberia, the Siberian Traps, a volcanic province covering an area larger than Western Europe, released greenhouse gases into the atmosphere over millions of years. Temperatures rose. Oceans acidified and lost oxygen. The climate destabilized globally and stayed destabilized. Roughly 96% of all marine species went extinct. Around 70% of terrestrial vertebrate species, the largest mass extinction in the fossil record. Some estimates suggest it took 10 million years for global species diversity to recover to anything resembling pre-extinction levels. Life came very close to not continuing, but it did continue. The survivors, small reptiles, early mammal ancestors, insects, plants, things that managed to find a corner and hold on, began slowly, filling the empty spaces, and into those spaces, the dinosaurs. Part 6, Dinosaurs and the Jurassic World. The Triassic period, 252 to 201 million years ago, was a world of recovery and experimentation. Warm and largely dry. One supercontinent, Pangaea, running from pole to pole. In this world, a group called the Archosaurs divided. One lineage would become the crocodilians, still here today, largely unchanged in body plan. The other lineage would become pterosaurs, the first vertebrates to achieve powered flight, and dinosaurs. Dinosaurs emerged during the Triassic, but the Jurassic period, 201 to 145 million years ago, is when they dominated. Pangaea had begun to break apart. Sea levels rose. Warm, shallow seas spread across much of what is now dry land. Dense forests of ferns, cycads, and early conifers covered the warmer regions. Sauropods, the long-necked plant eaters, moved through these forests. Brachiosaurus, Diplodocus, bodies of such scale that the logistics of feeding them are still interesting to work through. Diplodocus may have needed hundreds of kilograms of vegetation daily just to maintain its mass. It spent most of its time eating. It didn't have much choice. Theropods, bipedal, often predatory, shared these landscapes. Allosaurus among the more notable Jurassic predators, reaching around 8 to 9 meters in length. And in the trees and the air above, something was beginning. In 1861, limestone quarried in Bavaria yielded a fossil of a creature that had never been described before. Archaeopteryx. Clear, well-defined feathers, preserved in fine-grained stone in remarkable detail, but also teeth, a long, bony tail, claws on the wings, unmistakably bird-like, and at the same time, unmistakably something from an earlier period, both at once. We now understand that birds are, in the most literal sense, living dinosaurs. Specifically, the surviving lineage of the theropods, the same group that included Velociraptor and later Tyrannosaurus. When a bird settles on a branch or a fence post, it is an animal whose lineage runs directly back through 150 million years to the Jurassic. That fact tends to be more surprising each time it's remembered. Part 7. The end of the dinosaurs. 66 million years ago. The Cretaceous is ending. The world is warm. Flowering plants are spreading rapidly across the landscape. Insects are diversifying alongside them. Triceratops and Tyrannosaurus rex are alive. The planet is biologically rich. Then something arrives from space. An asteroid, 10 to 15 kilometers across, traveling at tens of kilometers per second, strikes what is now the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico. The immediate effects at the impact site are total. The wider consequence, vast quantities of dust and debris enter the upper atmosphere. Sunlight is cut. Temperatures fall globally. Plants struggle. The food chains built on plants begin to collapse from the bottom up. Over the months and years that follow, most large animals on Earth die. The non-avian dinosaurs, all of them, disappear from the fossil record. There is a thin layer of iridium found in rock strata all over the world, deposited at this exact geological moment. Iridium is rare on Earth's surface, common in asteroids. That layer, sometimes only a centimeter thick, marks the boundary with quiet precision. Below, dinosaurs. Above, they are gone. What happened next was, in a certain sense, something no one could have predicted from the inside. The small, warm-blooded creatures that survived, the early mammals, found themselves in a world that had been mostly emptied of large animals. For the first time in over 100 million years, there was ecological room. Habitats with no current occupants. Niches that had been held by large reptiles for an extraordinarily long time, suddenly open. Mammals had existed throughout the Mesozoic. They'd been, for the most part, small, nocturnal in many cases probably. Insect eaters and omnivores, keeping close to the ground. After the extinction, that constraint was lifted. Over the following tens of millions of years, mammals spread into every habitat on Earth, into the oceans, the ancestors of whales and dolphins, into the skies as bats, onto the grasslands as horses, elephants, the vast array of grazing animals, into the trees as primates. The diversity of mammals today, from the blue whale to the pygmy shrew, from the platypus to the giraffe, is the product of this expansion into a world reshaped by a rock from space. There's a certain absurdity in that sequence of events, and also, in its way, a kind of logic. Part 8. Primates and the road to us. Among the mammals diversifying in this post-extinction world were the primates. The earliest were small creatures, probably resembling today's tree shrews or tarsiers, living in tropical forests. Eyes facing forward, giving them depth perception across branches. Dexterous hands. Brains somewhat larger, relative to body size, than many other mammals of the time. Around 55 to 60 million years ago, the earliest primates appear in the fossil record. Over millions of years, the group diversified. Monkeys, apes, prosimians spreading through tropical forests across Africa and Asia. Around 15 to 20 million years ago, the great apes emerge. And somewhere between 5 and 7 million years ago, In Africa, the lineage leading to humans quietly diverged from the lineage leading to chimpanzees. Not an event, no moment when one species ended and another announced itself. A gradual separation, a population of apes in a shifting, drying landscape, slowly adapting over hundreds of thousands of generations. The sort of change that, from the inside, would have been completely invisible. Before the genus Homo, there were others. The Australopithecines were upright walking apes living in Africa from around 4 million years ago. Small-brained by our standards, but bipedal, walking on 2 legs in a way that freed their hands. A posture that turned out to matter in ways those early animals couldn't have anticipated, because no animal anticipates anything in that sense. The most famous is Lucy, a partial skeleton found in Ethiopia in 1974, dating to around 3.2 million years ago. Named after a Beatles song that was playing in the camp the night she was discovered, which is, as naming conventions go, rather better than most. Lucy walked upright and also climbed trees. Her shoulder joints suggest she was comfortable in both contexts. She had a small brain and a projecting face, probably not dramatically different in daily life from the other apes of her time, except for that ground-covering walk. From the Australopithecines, the genus Homo emerged. Homo habilis, around 2.4 million years ago, associated with simple stone tools, stones knapped to a rough edge, scrapers and choppers. Not sophisticated, but evidence of something that hadn't existed before. Intentional modification of the physical world, using one object to alter another. Homo erectus appeared around 1.9 million years ago, taller, longer-legged, a body shape closer to ours. There is evidence, debated in its details but accumulating, that Homo erectus used fire, controlled fire, and Homo erectus traveled out of Africa and into Europe and Asia, covering enormous distances across a world that was, at the time, cycling through periodic glaciations. Around 300,000 years ago, in Africa, our own species appeared. Homo sapiens. A high forehead, a chin, which sounds minor, but is actually fairly unusual among hominins. A brain organized to support language, planning, and something that begins to look like abstract thought. They lived in small, mobile groups, moved with the seasons, made tools of increasing refinement, and perhaps 120 to 160,000 years ago, some of them began doing things that feel, across that enormous distance of time, recognizably human. Ochre pigments ground and applied to surfaces, shells perforated and probably worn, simple marks engraved on bone. The first signs of representation, of making something mean something else. Part 9. Out of Africa, around 70 to 80,000 years ago, a small group of modern humans left Africa. We don't know exactly why. Climate shifts may have altered the landscape and resource base. Population pressure, possibly. Simple movement outward, following food, following curiosity. It's hard to say exactly why any particular migration begins. They move through what is now the Middle East, then east into Asia, north into Europe. In Europe, they encountered another human species, the Neanderthals. The popular image of Neanderthals, stooped, dim, barely human, was wrong and has been comprehensively revised. Neanderthals were fully adapted to cold climates, robust, strong, physiologically built for a glacial world. They made tools of real sophistication. They buried their dead, in at least some communities. They used pigments. They wore ornaments made from shells and feathers. They lived in social groups with apparent bonds between individuals. They were people, not identical to us, but people. For tens of thousands of years, Neanderthals and modern humans coexisted in Europe and Western Asia, their populations overlapping in time and space. The genetic evidence tells us, now with considerable certainty, that they interbred. Most people of non-African descent today carry between 1 and 4% Neanderthal DNA. It's there in the genome, readable. The Neanderthals as a distinct group disappeared around 40,000 years ago. Competition with modern humans was almost certainly part of it. Climate change, possibly. The full picture isn't clear. What is clear? They are not entirely gone. They persist, in a small and permanent way, in us. Part 10. The Great Journey. Over the tens of thousands of years that followed, modern humans spread across the entire planet, across Europe and Asia, into the frozen north of Siberia, and then across the Bering Land Bridge, exposed when sea levels were lower, into the Americas, south through North America, through Central America, into South America, reaching Patagonia and Tierra del Fuego around 14 to 15,000 years ago, into Australia, perhaps 60 to 65,000 years ago, across stretches of open ocean that required watercraft and enough navigational knowledge to survive the crossing. We can only infer the craft and the knowledge from the fact that people arrived. And then the Pacific, one of the more extraordinary chapters in all of human prehistory. The Polynesian peoples, navigating by stars and wind and the behavior of ocean, swells across thousands of kilometers of open water, settling Hawaii, New Zealand, Easter Island, reaching the most remote inhabited points on Earth, using technologies we would now consider simple, but with a precision built across generations of accumulated knowledge and practice. People who could read the ocean like a map, because for them it was one. By around 15,000 years ago, humans lived on every continent except Antarctica. A species that had spent most of its history as a small African population, probably never more than a few 100,000 individuals for long stretches of time, or had become, in evolutionary terms almost overnight, a planetary presence. Part 11. Agriculture. Around 12,000 years ago, something began to shift. In the Fertile Crescent, parts of what is now Iraq, Syria, Turkey, and independently in China, in Mesoamerica, in the Andes, and in several other places, people began to farm, not as a declared invention, not as something someone decided one morning. It was a gradual process, playing out across generations, noticing which plants responded to cultivation, keeping the animals that were easiest to manage, returning to the same ground each season. The transition from hunting and gathering to settled agriculture is sometimes called the Neolithic Revolution, and the word revolution fits even if the change itself was slow, uneven, and probably looked from the inside like very ordinary life. Farming allowed larger populations. Larger populations required organization. Organization led to villages, towns, and eventually cities, where people who had never met agreed on shared systems of exchange, governance, record-keeping. Record-keeping became writing. Writing is where recorded history begins, and all of it. The pyramids built around 4,500 years ago. The rise and fall of the Roman Empire within the last 2,000 years. The Industrial Revolution less than 300 years ago. all of recorded human history in its entirety, fits within the very final fraction of the story we've been moving through tonight. An extraordinarily small slice of 4 billion years, part 12, the web of life. While we've been following our own lineage, the rest of life on Earth has continued its own journey alongside us, worth stepping back to notice. The oceans today contain ecosystems almost as strange as anything from the Cambrian. Deep-sea hydrothermal vents, discovered only in 1977, turned out to host entire food webs built not on sunlight, but on chemical energy. Tube worms meters long, anchored to the rock. Blind shrimp clustering around the warm vents in such numbers that the scientists on the first submersible to find them had to look twice at their instruments. Bacteria that metabolize hydrogen sulfide in superheated water. An entire ecosystem, self-contained and completely independent of the sun. The rainforests of the Amazon and Congo basin run on relationships of extraordinary specificity. The fig tree and its pollinator wasps. Each species of fig has essentially its own species of wasp, and neither can reproduce without the other. The relationship has been refined over millions of years into something that functions like a lock and key. Remove one, and the other follows. Beneath forest floors, networks of fungal threads connect the root systems of trees across hectares. Mycorrhizal networks, exchanging carbon and nutrients and chemical distress signals between trees. A tree that is being attacked by insects releases chemicals that neighboring trees detect and respond to by increasing their own chemical defenses. The mechanisms are still being characterized, but the fact of the communication is no longer in serious doubt. Life is a web of relationships, most of them invisible, most of them ancient. Part 13. Patterns. Moving through this story, a few things keep appearing. Persistence. Life, once it appeared, has never been extinguished. Asteroid impacts, volcanic eruptions on continental scales, ocean chemistry shifts, ice ages kilometers thick. Through all of it, the chain has held. Not always in the same forms, not always in the same places, but unbroken. Not once, in 4 billion years. Connection. Every living thing on Earth today is related to every other living thing. This is not a figure of speech. It is a genetic and evolutionary fact. We share genes with bacteria. We share a substantial portion of our DNA with fruit flies, mice, chimpanzees. The tree of life is a real structure, a single original lineage branching over billions of years into every species that has ever existed. Transformation. Nothing in this story stays the same. Species change. Landscapes change. The atmospheric composition, the arrangement of continents, the chemistry of oceans. All of it has been transforming continuously since the beginning. Life has not resisted that. It has moved with it through the patient, undirected process of natural selection, generation by generation, small adjustment by small adjustment. Mama, Part 14, a reflection. The rock beneath you right now formed 4.5 billion years ago. Some of the atoms in your body were forged inside stars that had already finished their lives before our sun ignited. The oxygen you're breathing was released over billions of years by cyanobacteria floating in an ancient ocean. This is just what is true. You are made of the oldest material there is, and you are part of an unbroken chain of living things, reaching back to the first chemistry that managed to copy itself in warm water. The story of life on Earth is not a story of progress toward a destination. It is more like a river, beginning somewhere small, splitting and joining and changing course, sometimes slowing almost to stillness, sometimes moving quickly through narrow places, always finding a way forward. Occasionally, something enormous diverts it, a mass extinction, a supercontinent breaking apart, a rock from space. The river continues. We are here tonight, somewhere along that river, which has been flowing for almost 4 billion years. That is quite something. Around 350 to 300 million years ago, the land transformed. Forests grew. Not the patchy, low vegetation of earlier periods, but vast, towering forests. Club mosses called lepidodendron, reaching 30 or 40 meters, their bark patterned in diamond shapes. Giant horsetails called calamites. Tree ferns spreading broad canopies across swampy ground. These were coal swamps, spread across enormous areas of what is now North America and Europe. Warm, wet, saturated. The kind of environment that leaves a fossil record simply because things that fall into waterlogged ground don't always decompose. Life diversified rapidly. Amphibians grew large. Eriops, a crocodile-sized creature with a broad, flat head and short, powerful limbs, moving through shallow water and muddy banks. Insects evolved flight for the first time in the history of life. The oxygen-rich atmosphere of the Carboniferous, higher than today's, may be part of why some of them grew to sizes that would seem alarming now. Meganeura, a dragonfly-like insect, had a wingspan of up to 70 centimeters. The first reptiles appeared in the undergrowth, small lizard-like animals, laying amniotic eggs on dry land, moving quietly away from dependence on water. Those Carboniferous forests left something behind. When the vast trees died, they fell into waterlogged ground and were buried under sediment. Without oxygen, they didn't fully decompose. Over millions of years, pressure and heat transformed them into coal. The coal that drove the Industrial Revolution. The coal still extracted and burned today. Ancient sunlight, stored in wood 300 million years ago. When coal burns, it's those carbon atoms, drawn from the atmosphere by Carboniferous plants, locked into wood, buried, compressed, returning. The same atoms, completing a very long loop. The flowering of the world. Around 140 to 130 million years ago, something new appeared in the plant world. A flower. Before flowers, most plants reproduced by releasing pollen to the wind. Enormous quantities of it, drifting randomly. An effective strategy, but inefficient. Most pollen never reached another plant of the same species. Flowers changed that. By producing nectar, a reliable nutritional reward, they attracted insects. Insects moving between flowers, collecting nectar, carried pollen with them, deposited it precisely. As flowers diversified, different colors, different shapes, different scents, different flowering times, insects diversified alongside them, each lineage shaping the other. The tongue of a hawk moth is precisely the length needed to reach the nectar at the base of a particular orchid. The orchid's flower tube evolved longer. The moth's tongue evolved longer to match. Back and forth, across millions of years. A conversation conducted in anatomy. By the time the non-avian dinosaurs disappeared, flowering plants were already well established in many ecosystems. They now make up around 90% of all plant species on Earth. The gardens and forests and meadows we know are, in large part, the result of this 100-million-year diversification. The ocean's long memory. Throughout all of this, every extinction, every recovery, every shift of continent and chemistry, the ocean has remained, changed in temperature, in composition, in the life it holds, but continuous. The same body of water that surrounded the first living cells still moves against the shores of every continent. The same water cycle still carries moisture from sea to sky to mountain to river and back. In the deep ocean, water circulates on timescales that dwarf anything in human history. Some water in the deep basins last contacted the surface centuries ago, and in the sediment accumulating on the seafloor, there is a detailed record of everything that has lived in the water above. The shells of tiny organisms called foraminifera, raining down for millions of years, building up layer by layer. The layers can be drilled and sampled. Ancient temperatures, read from the chemistry of microscopic shells. Ocean pH over tens of millions of years. The record is there, patient and legible. The ice ages around 2.6 million years ago. The Earth entered a period of periodic glaciation that continues, technically, today. The Quaternary glaciation, a rhythm of cold periods and warm ones, cycling roughly every 100,000 years. At the last glacial maximum, around 20,000 years ago, ice sheets more than 4 kilometers thick covered much of North America and northern Europe. Sea levels sat about 120 meters lower than today. Britain was connected to mainland Europe. The Bering Strait was dry land. People and animals walked across it. The ice carved the landscapes we now inhabit. The Great Lakes of North America are glacial. The fjords of Norway and Scotland. The flat, fertile plains of the American Midwest. The boulders that appear in improbable places across the English countryside. Large grey stones resting in fields, left there by retreating glaciers, sometimes transported thousands of kilometers from their origin. The last Ice Age world held creatures now gone. Woolly mammoths moving in herds across the steppe tundra of Siberia and North America, up to 6 tons. Long, coarse hair, tusks curving in wide arcs. The woolly rhinoceros, the cave bear, larger than any brown bear alive today. Smilodon in the Americas, with canine teeth extending 15 centimeters below the jaw. All gone within a relatively short window after the first humans arrived in their territories. Climate change contributed. The warming and changing habitats of the post-glacial world were challenging for animals shaped by cold conditions. The timing of human arrival is a variable that is difficult to set aside entirely. The question is still debated, probably always will be. The quiet lives of plants are easy to overlook in a story like this. They don't move in ways we easily perceive, don't make sounds, don't have faces, but they've been on land for around 470 million years and have found solutions to surviving in almost every terrestrial environment on Earth. Phototropism, the bending of a stem toward a light source, looks passive. It isn't. It involves a cascade of chemical signals through the plant's tissues, cells on the shaded side elongating more than those on the lit side, the stem curving as a result. An active response to conditions running continuously. Mimosa pudica, the sensitive plant, folds its leaflets shut when touched, reopening over the following minutes. The mechanism involves electrical signals and rapid water movement between cells. Trees under insect attack release volatile compounds into the air. Neighboring trees detect these and begin increasing chemical defenses in their own leaves. Not quickly, not consciously, but the response is real, documented, and presumably effective over the timescales of insect populations and growth seasons. The coast redwoods of California. Hyperion, the tallest known individual, stands just over 115 meters. In the dry California summer, coastal fog rolls in from the Pacific, and the redwood's needle-like leaves capture water from it, droplets forming and falling to the ground around the tree's base. A large redwood can add hundreds of liters to the soil on a foggy day through this mechanism alone. A clonal colony of quaking aspens in Utah, known as Pando, shares a single root system beneath the ground. What appears to be a forest of individual trees is genetically one organism. Around 80,000 stems, all connected, all identical. Estimated mass, around 6 million kilograms, making it one of the heaviest known single organisms on Earth. Pando is thought to be approximately 80,000 years old. Its roots were already established when modern humans were beginning to leave Africa. In the White Mountains of California, a bristlecone pine, its exact location kept deliberately vague to protect it from visitors who have been known to damage it, is over 5,000 years old. The pyramids of Giza were being built when this tree was already ancient. It's still there. None as such, the microbiome. The human microbiome contains an estimated 38 trillion microbial cells. Bacteria, archaea, fungi, living primarily in the gut, but also on the skin and in every surface and passage of the body. For a long time, the relationship between humans and these microbes was understood mainly in terms of disease. Bacteria as pathogens to resist. The picture is considerably more nuanced. Gut bacteria help digest food our own enzymes cannot process. They synthesize vitamins we cannot produce ourselves. They interact with the immune system in ways that appear to calibrate its responses over time. There is accumulating evidence, debated in its details, but accumulating, that they may influence mood via chemical signals traveling between gut and brain along the vagus nerve. We are not, in the strict biological sense, single organisms. We are communities, hosts to vast numbers of living things, many of which are carrying out functions we depend on. The bacteria in the human gut carry their own evolutionary histories, their own lineages stretching back billions of years. Some of them are the descendants of organisms that were already ancient when animals first appeared. Convergent evolution. Evolution, working independently across enormous distances of time and space, repeatedly arrives at the same solution. The eye has evolved separately around 40 to 60 times in the history of life. The camera-type eye, with a lens focusing light onto a sensitive surface, evolved independently in vertebrates and in cephalopods, the group that includes octopuses and squid. Two completely different lineages diverged from a common ancestor that had no eyes at all, both eventually arriving at the same basic optical arrangement. Their retinas are even wired differently. In vertebrates, the light-sensitive cells point backward toward the back of the eye. In cephalopods, they point forward. Same structure, different implementation. Wings evolved independently in pterosaurs, birds, bats, and, in the modified sense of gliding membranes, flying squirrels and gliding lizards. The streamlined, torpedo-shaped body plan of a fast swimmer evolved in fish, dolphins, sharks, and the long-extinct ichthyosaurs. Separate lineages, same hydrodynamic form, porcupine spines and echidna spines, the pouches of Virginia opossums and of kangaroos. Again and again, different lineages facing similar problems find similar answers. This tells you something about the constraints, the physics of moving through water, the optics of forming an image, the mechanics of flight. These constrain what works. The available solutions may be fewer than they appear. Nova. The oceans as a cradle. The ocean covers around 71% of the planet's surface. It contains about 97% of all the water on Earth, absorbs the majority of the planet's excess heat, and produces roughly half the oxygen in the atmosphere through the photosynthesis of phytoplankton, microscopic algae drifting in the sunlit surface layer of every ocean. Those phytoplankton are descendants of the cyanobacteria from near the beginning of this story, smaller than the width of a human hair, invisible individually, collectively one of the most productive groups of organisms on Earth. Humpback whales compose songs, long, structured sequences of sounds lasting up to 20 minutes, audible across hundreds of kilometers of water. These songs change over time, new phrases spreading from whale to whale across ocean basins, sometimes in the space of a few years, as though passing through a population like a slowly moving wave. Octopuses, solitary, short-lived, with a nervous system organized in a fundamentally different way from ours, learn, solve problems, and appear, in various documented observations, to play. Their intelligence seems to have arisen almost entirely independently from vertebrate intelligence, a completely separate evolutionary route, arriving at something that, from the outside, looks recognizably similar. Actually, more accurately, it's hard to say how similar. Measuring cognition across lineages that diverged before either had a brain is genuinely difficult. Sea turtles navigate thousands of kilometers of open ocean to return to the exact beach where they hatched, sometimes decades earlier. They use magnetic field sensing and probably chemical cues, a map of sorts, encoded in the body, stable enough after a lifetime at sea to locate a particular stretch of coastline on a particular island. What we don't know, this story has been told with confidence in places. The age of the Earth, the sequence of the fossil record, the structure of DNA, the shared ancestry of all life. These are well established, but the edges are genuinely open. The exact origin of life, the precise mechanism by which chemistry became biology, remains uncertain. Warm little ponds, hydrothermal vents, tidal pools, ice surfaces. Each has been proposed. Each has supporting evidence. None has been definitively confirmed. The field is active. New evidence turns up. The causes of the Cambrian explosion are still being worked out. The role of humans in the disappearance of the Pleistocene megafauna, the mammoths, mastodons, giant ground sloths, cave bears, is still genuinely debated. Whether life exists elsewhere in the universe, whether it would use the same molecular language as life on Earth, whether the four-letter chemical alphabet of DNA is a universal solution or one of many possible ones. Completely open questions. The scientists working on these things, paleontologists, evolutionary biologists, astrobiologists, geochemists, are working at the edges of what is known, making observations, forming hypotheses, testing and revising. occasionally finding something that changes the picture significantly. A fossil that doesn't fit the expected timeline. A genetic analysis that reveals a relationship no one anticipated. An experiment that demonstrates, for the first time, how a particular molecule might have assembled itself under early Earth conditions. The story is still being written. A final note: the story of life on Earth is still unfolding. Right now, as you rest, species are adapting to changing conditions. Populations are separating into new territories. Mutations are accumulating in genomes. Some neutral, some useful, most never noticed. New ecological relationships are forming between organisms that haven't interacted before. Old ones are ending. This process moves at its own pace, indifferent to whether anyone is watching or understanding or taking notes. But we can notice it. We are, as far as we know, the first species to be able to look back along the branching history of life and follow it to this moment. To hold something like 4 billion years in mind at once, however hazily, however partially, to feel the weight of it, or at least something in that direction. Wherever you are now, still listening, or somewhere between listening and sleep, you've moved through a great deal tonight. Ancient oceans, Cambrian seas, the first forests, and the first flight, the long age of dinosaurs, and the quiet world that followed, the patient expansion of mammals, and the slow emergence of something that would eventually walk upright, make marks on rock, cross open ocean by starlight, and lie down at the end of a day, wondering where it all came from. The story doesn't end here. It continues at its own pace, as it always has. You're part of it. Rest now. Good night.